Hey, how's it going, everybody? My name is SockBot, and today we actually have a request. I know, right? Request? What kind of channel is this? But anyways, a user by the name of Graciela, please excuse me if I'm mispronouncing that wrong, but thank you for watching my videos because you seem really cool. And thanks for giving me my first request. But today, she asked me to make a video about versus levels, kind of how to make them and what is involved within a versus level. So that's what we're doing today. Now, I know I did talk about score challenges in particular recently. If you haven't seen that video, feel free to go watch it. But I do have a very different relationship with versus levels, and I will obviously talk about the differences. So if you are interested in this video, continue to watch and leave a like down below and subscribe if you want. And also, thank Graciela for suggesting this, because she seems cool. Okay, so let's get into it. Now, the basic setup for a versus level is pretty important. You need 5 things. First, you need an entry point, like with any other kind of level. That's how you get into the level. Second, you need a tutorial or guide, and I know a lot of levels have these, but I think they're particularly valuable in a versus level. And 3, you need a start switch. Again, not completely necessary, but super valuable. 4, you need the challenge, obviously. And 5, you need a set of end conditions and an endpoint. Endpoint, self-explanatory. End conditions, I will get into. So as I start this, I want to apologize if I'm looking down. It's because I do have some notes here. I'm trying to make this as concise and specific as possible because it's a lot of content to get through. So now that we've started that and taken way too long to get into it, let's talk about the entry point. The entry point is very dependent on what kind of challenge you're making, and it definitely can be in the same area as number 2 and 3, which is the start button and the challenge itself. But, as I will talk about later, it's very important that you don't just drop the player into the challenge with no intro or explanation of the controls. There are exceptions, like if your level doesn't really add any controls, a la a survival challenge, but otherwise you definitely need this intro. Now, for your introduction, you want to introduce your level super thoroughly. For versus levels, your demographic, like you included, is a ratio of at most 1 to 2, where the 1 out of every 3 people is the one that actually plays and owns the game. To explain, if you make your own levels, chances are you play locally with friends at some point or another, and don't get me wrong, couch co-op is awesome, but playing versus level locally with friends is one place that Little Big Planet super shines. It can obviously be competitive, but hilarious at the same time, so when you're making a versus level, you have to introduce the level in a more basic way than usual, as players playing locally, your friends included, are almost definitely on different levels of play and of experience when it comes to Little Big Planet. And as with every level, make signs or text boxes that explain any additional controls you've added via Sackboy or SockBot or otherwise if you're using other characters, but also add notes or how-tos if you're using any of the power-ups or alternate characters. I think you can assume most players will know how to run and jump, or if they don't, obviously they'll tell each other, but honestly, if you're going to use something niche like Grabinators from Little Big Planet 2, even experienced players are not going to remember that, so give them a reminder with a note or a sign or something of the sort. If it's more complicated, consider adding an optional tutorial, emphasis on optional, that has a small stage where players can learn what everything does without the fear of dying constantly. But the most important phrase here is optional. I see so many versus level where the intro or tutorial takes more than 10 seconds. Players are going to be playing through this level a lot, and also dying a lot because it's versus level, and they're not going to want to watch your beautiful intro, no matter how beautiful it is, if it's 30 seconds every time they restart. If you do add something like this, either make it short, like super short, a couple seconds long, or give the player an option to skip it. For the level that you're watching here, the players actually have to watch the intro once no matter what, but there's also a sticker that they can easily collect within the level once they do start it that will let them skip it in the future. Now, after you have your intro done, there should be some kind of switch or button or something that starts the level. Here, it is literally just a button. Super simple. Second, the switch needs to actually start the challenge. Now, what I mean by this is, for example here, the switch sends the players to the challenge area, that's the teleporter from before, and it also starts a sequencer that begins dropping points via an emitter. These points are basically just there so that the players have a benchmark for how far they got in the challenge versus the other players. Many levels have a similar sequencer, like in addition to the points, that also makes the level harder and harder over time, which then speeds moving platforms or makes things more electric or makes less of the platform inhabitable, but this level actually allows the players to do that, the level you're seeing in the background, and the point of that is to kind of encourage them to touch all the switches and try to screw each other over, so that kind of part in the sequencer isn't really necessary. Lastly, you need to link this button to the scoreboard if you have one. This way, any players that died during your level, whether intentionally or if that's the point of your level that they die eventually, will then spawn at the endpoint before the level ends, thus ending the level. You want to do this because if you don't have some sort of end of the level, if you just let them all die, there's no real reward. They don't get to see that they won, they just kind of are left to assume that they won. This is actually a big issue with a lot of survival challenges that they see, so take this note into account. So voila, the challenge has started. I'm so sorry for that. Most challenges are going to have some sort of basis within a score challenge, but be focused on who gets more points than the others, as opposed to a single high score. I'm not going to list every kind of challenge or every way this can work, but if you do go the route of a survival challenge, where whoever survives the longest gets to win the challenge, an easy trick to do this is to have a start button linked to a looping sequencer that will give all players that are still alive, which is just the base setting of all players because it doesn't give it to them dead, it'll give them all a certain amount of points every couple seconds. Alternatively, you can go old school and have the points drop from an emitter every few seconds after the start switch is pressed. I prefer this, but that's just because it's more tactical and it feels more satisfying to pick up the points rather than just get them. So what now? Well, either you have a time limit, one player is left, or everybody's dead. Whatever you choose as like the end of your level are your end conditions, and you need to make these end conditions sensible, which means to say that for these end conditions, there needs to be a sensor or a switch that realizes that those have been met so it can end the level for you. For a time level, that's super easy. You just use the timer and then link it to what I will talk about later. The timer is your end condition. If you want the level to end when only one player is left though, like in this level, it's a bit more complicated. Luckily with Little Big Planet 3 it's actually not super complicated, but for this situation you're going to want to use 2 player sensors. So take those 2 and put them on a microchip that you then place in the center of your level, that is the stage where everything's actually happening, you know, the challenge. And then you're going to make sure each player sensor's radius is set to the exact same thing, which is the entire play area, so that anybody within the challenge, no matter what corner they're in, is sensed. Now, set one of them to detect 2 players and the other one to detect 1 player, and then connect both of them to an XOR switch. This way, the switch is only going to output when there's only 1 player left. You can also set a safety measure, and this is rarely necessary, but I've had to do it a couple times, and this safety measure is connecting the XOR switch to a timer that's configured to start counting up when it's activated. Then you have to connect the XOR switch output to also a NOT switch, and the NOT switch output to the reset part of the timer. This avoids some glitches when one player spawns in the area before the rest, and then it just ends the level right away. So in this case, the counter's output is your end conditions met switch. So for everything I'm going to talk about in a second, you want to use the counter as opposed to the XOR switch. Whichever one you do choose for your level, you then have 2 choices. Connect the end condition switch, that's, you know, the timer or the XOR switch or the other timer that I mentioned connected to the XOR switch, lots of different choices. You want to connect that to either a level ender, which is the lame choice, or you're going to connect them to a teleporter on the scoreboard. That way, if anybody is still alive during your end conditions, they're teleported to the scoreboard where the rest of the players will then respawn, and you can see who won and who did better than everybody else. I say this is the better choice than just, you know, some kind of level ender, because in versus levels, the best way to reward the player who wins is to, you know, show them how much better they are than all their friends. I'm not a masochist, I promise. I just, you know, I like being told I'm good at things. Who doesn't? Anyways, as an addition, if your challenge does end before everybody dies, you can connect your end condition switch to a sequencer that plays some kind of fanfare before teleporting the winners to the scoreboard. Likewise, if you're making a survival challenge, have the sequencer give the last players that are standing points via an emitter or a score giver before the end of the level. I know at this point that you're just really excited to finish your level and post it and everything like that, but definitely give them some kind of reward because it's over for you, but for them, giving that big reward at the end that gives them time to gloat over everybody else will definitely keep them coming back to play a couple times, and it'll make the people that lost want to come back too so they can kick whoever won's butt. My personal favorite way of doing this, and I will show it here, is this kind of point shower because it's super tactical and it's just really satisfying. I found that it's very successful with a lot of the people that I've played with, especially people that don't play Little Big Planet very often. So I know that's a lot of info and I know it's a lot of things to remember, so please feel free to come back to this or ask any questions in the comments down below if you have them. I will definitely respond to individual questions about Little Big Planet. I always do. But regardless, thanks again to Graciela for suggesting this kind of video type and level type. This whole level happened because of her, so if you have any suggestions, let me know, and definitely like the video and subscribe to my channel if you want to see more. This is literally a dream come true. There are almost like 450 of you watching at this point, which is like friggin' crazy. And yeah, I love sharing tips, and I love talking about little big planets. So let me know, and I hope you all are doing very well, and I will talk to you soon. Bye. Bye. Bye.